The rain pounded the dusty ridgeline like some relentless drum of fate, and already darkness lay heavy over the valley as Sergeant Kira Voss crouched behind the jagged rock outcrop scanning the horizon for movement. Her breathing came in sharp bursts, but her voice on the radio remained steady, calm, firm, just as she had trained. And yet the storm outside mirrored the chaos below, where her team had been pinned down for hours. The mission had started clean and precise, a high-altitude insertion, under the cover of night. Their objective, a compound hidden in the mountain pass, rumored to be the staging ground for a major insurgent offensive. Kira and 3 other snipers had worked like ghosts, slipping into position overlooking the target. Their team on the ground had cleared the outer perimeter swiftly, but as dawn approached, the insurgents hunkered down and countered with mortar fire, and then the ridge collapsed under a hail of AK rounds and grenades. Captain Reeves had shouted, orders over the mic telling Kira and the others to hold position and provide overwatch until extraction arrived. Her scope slid across the ridge, picking out heat signatures in the dull, rain-soaked dusk as she calibrated the wind and the punishing weather. She was their top sniper, the one they called when they needed impossible, and she had been impossible in worse environments. But this night the storm was worse than any memory. The roar of rain in her ears made the radio crackle, and all. Around she felt the weight of fatigue and adrenaline mingled with fear. Her teammates had begun to exfil under the code word, Dark Raven, 5 minutes ago. But something changed as the bullets rained and the ridge slipped from stability. The team shifted. Their plan. The extraction point at LZ Omega was still 20 minutes distant by foot and 10 by helicopter, but the weather had grounded most aircraft. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears as the sound of thunder cracked overhead and lightning flickered. Across the valley walls, she heard the captain's voice one last time over the static. Reeves said, "Hold until the evac chopper can reach you, but get ready to move. The evac will hit you in 5, she acknowledged. Then she adjusted her position and locked her scope onto the insurgent machine gun nest, flooding fire into the extraction zone. Her finger tight on the trigger, she squeezed once, twice. 2 men dropped the heavy weapon, clattering into the rain-slick rock. Her teammates covered the move, while Kira shifted left and right, scanning for secondary threats. Bullets ricocheted off stone shards, and she felt a cold splash of water down her cheek, which she dismissed as rain. But she knew the rock would not protect her forever. Enemy was regrouping. She saw movement beyond the boulder, 30 yards out. A flash of dark cloth and the glint of metal. Her heart dropped. Then the radio came alive with the captain's voice again, but now the tone was urgent. Reeves said, "All units. Pull out now!" I repeat. Pull out eyebrows, furrowed and spine stiff. Kira shouted into the mic, "Copy, copy." "But I will stay. I have eyes on the target." Something inside her clenched. The team followed orders, or they tried. She watched them leave one by one into the misty rain, dripping twilight. Their boots slipping across the sodden trail, their forms disappearing into the gloom. She blinked in the downpour and raised the radio. But no reply. The static filled her ears like sand grinding with each beat of her heart. She cursed the high command decision. She felt the betrayal snake through her veins as she realized they had left. She slid farther back, pressing her knee to the ground, unable to remove her boot from the soaked surface. The wind slapped her face and thunder collapsed overhead as though the sky were cracking open. She thought about the boy she once trained at sniper school in Virginia, the one who had fallen in a training accident. She promised him she would never let her team down. She promised she would protect them. To fail now on her watch stuck her like a knife. Her legs screamed in protest. The mortar blast had hit a rock shelf and sent fragments into her thigh, wrenching a cry from her teeth, which the rain swallowed. But she kept her rifle raised. She listened for the chop of blades. The evac was supposed to come. But the rotor wash of helicopters never broke the storm's roar. Instead, splintered beams of lightning and the thunder's howl and the enemy assault filled the night. Her link to her team flickered off completely, and when the insurgents began advancing uphill toward her position, Kira realized she might be on her own. She exhaled and tightened the grip on her suppressed rifle she focused on, breathing slow and deep, counting in her head. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her training kicked in. She scanned the ridgeline above and around, spotting a squad of insurgents creeping behind boulders. They were moving fast, timing the rain to mask their approach. The world reduced to cold rain sound and movement. She fired a single round, the crack loud in the night, then another and another. Each target fell. The satisfaction was hollow. Her leg burned and the rain soaked into her gear. She ducked behind a rock and pulled out her emergency locator and pressed the button for extraction. But the device beeped only once, and then the signal was gone. The storm must have knocked out the comm satellites. She crushed the device and tucked it away. She looked up and saw the silhouette of the captain's chopper slicing through the cloud bank, but the rotor seemed frozen in time and then vanished. She dropped the rifle and dug out a tourniquet from her pack. She wrapped it tight above the wound, her fingers, numb from cold and blood. She muttered a prayer for survival and maybe for revenge. She stuffed the pack against her leg to use as a brace and slowly began to crawl. Down the ridge, she needed to find cover and supplies. Battalions of insurgents were converging. She knew the odds. She knew she was alone. She refused to accept defeat. She passed an abandoned ammo crate half covered in water and rifled through it, grabbing 2 mags and a packet of ready-to-eat dinner straps. She wolfed it down. While the rain beat her face, she shivered and then spotted a narrow cave entrance hidden by brush. It offered shelter but might also house enemies. She weighed the risk. Then she decided survival was priority. She dragged herself inside and collapsed. For a moment, her rifle across her lap. The cave smelled of damp earth and something old. She blinked hard and checked her weapon. She heard muffled voices outside the entrance. She froze. 3 armed men passed the threshold. She held her breath. Her scope laid quietly across her lap, her body silent. She watched them stride past in boots that splashed water, and the rainstorm roared outside like a beast unleashed. When they were gone, she exhaled and slid deeper into darkness. The cave offered some sanctuary, but the enemy could pour in at any moment. She rested her head on her rifle butt and drifted between consciousnesses. Images of her team's departure danced in her mind, their figures vanishing. Their backs turned their promise to return. She clenched her jaw. She would not give up. On the radio, she heard only static and sometimes distant gunfire echoing like cruel laughter. She thought of the order that had been given, leave her, and how the words replayed in her ears. Her throat tightened. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, and when she reopened them, she decided what she would do. Next, she would wait for night to fully drop, and then move through the storm toward the ridge again, toward the place where her team had left her. She would find them, or she would make them come for her. She would not allow them the comfort of forgetting her. The storm raged outside and inside her mind, but one thought kept her going: survival and returning with purpose. Her finger brushed the trigger guard, and she whispered to the darkness, "I am still here." And with that, she rose from the stone floor of the cave and crawled into the rain once more unseen, unbroken and furious. Kira lay still as stone, her face pressed against the cold earth, while rain traced silent rivers down her cheeks and mixed with the blood crusting along her leg. The scent of wet rock and distant smoke coiling into her nose as she forced herself not to breathe too deeply, not to twitch, not to give even. The slightest hint of life beneath the shadow of nightfall. She had been trained to embrace discomfort, to accept pain, to blend into the terrain like shadow folds among shadows. But this was something else entirely. This was abandonment and isolation, and the brutal, creeping realization that her name might never be spoken again in any briefing room or mess hall. She did not think about home, because home was another planet now, another timeline where she was still one of the elite, still trusted, still part of something instead. She counted the drops falling off the lip of the rock above her, as if they were seconds ticking toward some invisible end movement echoed through the storm. A faint shuffling to the south, the sound of boots, not careful, ones not trained ones, the clumsy shuffle of men who had weapons but not discipline. She narrowed her eyes through the dark, watching through her scope, though the rifle felt heavy. Now her muscles unwilling, her blood too thin and cold to heat them. Back into readiness. Two figures moved through the brush, pausing near the boulder. She had taken her last shot from one of them, gesturing toward the blood smear along the stone. Kira froze the rain running down her neck like icy fingers as one of the men moved closer to investigate. Her finger tightened around the trigger, though her pulse stuttered for a half-beat, and her breath caught in her throat. She had 2 rounds left and no margin for noise, no time for escape. But the man turned his back too soon, muttering something over his shoulder in a language she only understood when it was screamed by enemies too close to miss. They moved on, fading into the downpour, and Kira did not breathe until their voices drowned entirely in the wind. She let her head drop for a moment, exhaustion creeping in like mold in damp wood. Her leg pulsed with each heartbeat, the wound worse than she wanted to admit, and though the bleeding had slowed, the pain had sharpened, become clean-focused and relentless. She knew she could not stay here. She dragged herself across the wet earth, using only her elbows and good leg, her rifle slung across her back like a sacred weight. The trail was steep and the mud slick, but she found a narrow game path along the slope, just wide enough for her to move without exposing herself to the ridge above. Thunder rolled across the valley like a low growl, and somewhere far off she heard a dog bark, or maybe it was a coyote, or maybe she imagined it just to fill the silence that had become louder than bullets. Every few feet she stopped listening, eyes scanning left to right, her fingers trembling, not from fear but from the slow creeping cold that had sunk into her bones. She reached a shallow depression in the hillside and collapsed there, hiding beneath a tangle of thorny brush and dead branches that stank of decay and damp. Her eyes blinked slowly, and when they opened again, it was darker than before, and the rain had softened to a whisper. That was when she heard it, the soft shift of gravel under boots, the calculated rhythm of someone who knew how to walk without being heard. Her heart stopped, or it felt like it did as she pressed herself deeper into the mud fingers, brushing the grip of her sidearm. She heard the movement stop 5 feet from where she lay, and then silence. Not the kind of silence that feels safe or comforting, but the kind that waits, the kind that knows exactly where you are. She held her breath, and then something moved, a shadow passing behind the brush, a tall shape without light, without sound. Then a voice low-clipped, not a word, but a code, a series of sharp consonants tapped out in a rhythm she recognized. Seals. She blinked, unsure for a moment whether her mind had broken completely and fabricated hope out of hallucination. The figure knelt beside the brush, slowly lifting a hand, palm open, his face masked and painted, but his eyes scanning every angle around them. He said nothing as he looked down at her, just nodded once, then motioned toward the trail with 2 fingers. Another shape appeared behind him, just as silent and just as unreadable. She tried to stand and failed. The first man moved without hesitation, lifting her onto his back like a sack of gear and moving up the slope. Her vision blurred again, but not from pain this time, from something deeper, from the sudden collapse of tension she had been holding for days. The seal moved like a shadow, a living ghost. He carried her without effort, without complaint, and when they reached the ridge, she saw more of them. 4, maybe 5, crouched in silence, weapons pointed outward, not inward. And for the first time since the storm began, she felt something like safety, but she also felt something else. They had not come for her, not specifically, which meant something bigger was moving. They reached a cave tucked into the side of a rock shelf, its entrance so narrow she never would have found it on her own. Inside, it opened into a cramped shelter lit by chemical glow sticks and surrounded by cases of gear, ammo, and rations. The man lowered her onto a mat, and one of the others moved in immediately, pulling out gauze and a field kit. Still no one spoke. Not until one of them removed his mask and she saw his face lined with age and experience, the kind of man who had seen too much and stopped counting years ago. He crouched beside her and finally broke the silence with a voice that carried authority, but not cruelty. "You are Kira Voss." She nodded, too weak to answer aloud. He nodded back. "I am Bishop." He glanced toward the entrance, then back to her. "We picked up your signal 3 nights ago, caught it before the satellites went dark. You are lucky or stubborn." She tried to smile, but it cracked. "We were tracking a different target when your signal overlapped. Figured if someone could stay alive in that hell alone, they were. Worth the trouble." He handed her a flask and motioned to the medic patch. "Her up, make sure she can walk by morning. We move fast and we do not double back." Kira drank and let the warmth spread through her chest, but her mind had already shifted from gratitude to focus. She looked around the cave at the silent soldiers, at their gear and maps and notes scribbled in code. They were preparing for something big, and they had found her not because they were looking for her, but because their mission happened across her grave. She asked one question, her voice raw and sharp. "What are you here for?" Bishop paused and then handed her a photo, not saying a word. She looked at it, her pulse stumbling. It was a satellite image of the same compound. Her team had hit days before, but this image was new, and the people in it were not insurgents. They were wearing American gear with no unit insignia. And then she understood, and as the lights dimmed and the cave fell into silence again, she knew she would not be leaving this valley the same. She would return, but not for rescue, not for home, for answers, and for vengeance. The rain had slowed to a faint mist as Kira stepped outside the mouth of the cave. Her weight shifted onto her uninjured leg, her rifle, freshly cleaned and slung across her back like it belonged there, like it had never been left behind. She moved silently with the SEAL unit, each of them dressed in gear that bore no name, no flag, no rank, just matte black and purpose. She had barely slept. The medic had numbed her leg with a field injection, patched it with a strange foam that hardened like armor, and handed her a pain suppressant that worked faster than logic should allow. But there had been no rest, only the endless hum of adrenaline and something deeper, something hot and buried. Bishop led the formation, his movements smooth and deliberate, like he could walk through minefields without making sound. The others followed close behind in a staggered diamond formation. Rifles up, eyes scanning every leaf, every shift of wind. Kira took rear. She knew the protocol, but more than that, she wanted to see every step they took, every path chosen and left behind. She wanted to learn their rhythm, understand their purpose. Because these men did not move like a standard team. They moved like something else. The mountain air was thinner now, climbing higher than she had during her mission with Reeves' squad. The terrain was sharper, more treacherous, but the SEALs treated it like a city block, navigating by instinct and sign language, never speaking, never hesitating. They reached a ridge just before dawn, and Bishop called a silent halt, raising one clenched fist into the air. Then, kneeling low, he motioned for Kira to come forward, and she joined him, belly to rock and eye to the scope he handed her without a word. What she saw in the distance made her chest freeze and burn all at once. The compound still operational, still guarded, but this time the perimeter was tighter, more controlled, the sentries better equipped, and the faces behind the scopes were not locals. They were Americans, or at least they had American gear, American weapons, and American posture. But their presence made no sense unless everything she had believed was wrong. She adjusted the scope and zeroed in on a face, one that looked disturbingly familiar from a briefing photo months ago. Someone marked as missing in action, presumed dead, but he was here walking the inner yard laughing with another operator who had no visible insignia. She pulled back from the scope and looked at Bishop, whose eyes watched her with that same unreadable calm. "You see it?" he said in a voice so low it barely touched the wind. She nodded. "We have been tracking this cell for weeks." Bishop continued off the grid, off the books, people who were never supposed to exist, people who work in the shadows and sometimes turn on the hand that feeds them. Why, she asked, because her throat could not hold the question. "Anymore, because some wars never end," he replied, "and some soldiers decide they are too valuable to be left behind." The words landed like a punch, too valuable to be left behind. And yet here she was. She turned her gaze back to the compound, her breath steady, now her hands no longer shaking. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Bishop smiled, but only with his eyes. "Intel. You know the structure, you know the ridges, the weak spots. You held overwatch for 9 hours in this terrain. You are our map." "And after that?" she asked. "After that, we make them remember what it feels like to lose something they thought was theirs." He handed her a pack lighter than she expected and full of tools she had never seen before. The mission began at dusk. 2 operators moved down toward the outer fence, cutting through a blind spot Kira had pointed out earlier. She stayed on overwatch, laying prone in a shadowed crag, with eyes on the 2 roving guards that patrolled the east corridor. When the signal came, 2 taps in her. Calm, she adjusted her sight and exhaled just once. Her first shot hit the lead guard in the throat, the second dropped the next one before his hand reached his radio. The bodies were dragged into cover, and Bishop signaled the advance. The team moved, fast like a needle stitching through the terrain, silent and precise. Kira followed, last scanning behind them, making sure no one doubled back or flanked from the west. They breached the first barrier using a magnetic pulse device that disabled the electronic lock in seconds. Once inside the compound, it changed. The enemy knew something was wrong. Red lights flared in the corridors, and a voice shouted something through a distorted PA speaker in a language that sounded wrong. Not foreign, just wrong. Kira flanked left, covering the outer rooms where crates of unmarked weapons lined the walls. She passed a door and froze. Inside, behind reinforced glass, was a room filled with surveillance screens, and one of them showed her, not her now, her then. Sniper, cam footage, thermal, scope readings, her own records from missions that had been classified. She stared and her skin went cold. This was not just a rogue cell. This was a collection, a trophy room. She turned and radioed, "Bishop, they have files on us." "On me? This is more than just a splinter op copy," he said. "Keep moving. We finish the mission, then we burn the rest." The firefight erupted 5 minutes later. Automatic fire roared through the inner yard, and the SEALs moved like a pack, shifting angles. Drawing lines of fire that carved through the defenders, Kira found herself in a hallway, knee-deep in smoke, her rifle barrel glowing with heat and her heart thudding. Not with fear, but with clarity. She moved toward the main control room, where the hard drives were stored, where the mission clock was ticking down toward whatever failsafe these ghosts had installed. Inside the control room, she found him. The man from the photo, the one who was supposed to be dead. He turned as she entered, not raising his weapon, just smiling, like he had been waiting for her. "I knew someone would come eventually," he said. She aimed at his head but did not fire. "Why?" she asked. "Because we were forgotten," he said, "and we decided to take something back." "Not like this?" she said. "Is there any other way?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and pulled the trigger. The blast took out the hard drives and the wall behind them, collapsing half the room in fire and smoke. She staggered outside, where Bishop was calling for evac, their signal finally, punching through the storm. As the helicopter descended, Kira looked back at the compound, now burning in the twilight, and felt no triumph, only resolve. She climbed into the bird and sat across from Bishop, who handed her a bottle of water and said, "Nothing." The flight back was silent, but not over, because she knew what she saw in that room, and she knew some files had been copied, and somewhere out there others were watching, others who knew her name. And as the wind roared around the chopper blades, she promised herself she would not stop, not until she knew how deep the betrayal went and who else had left her behind. The compound was reduced to rubble smoke rising from the crater where secrets had been buried too long and too deep, but nothing stayed buried forever. Not here. Not in this war without name and without sides. Kira Voss stepped off the bird as its rotors carved the wind behind her, her boots sinking slightly into the wet gravel of the undisclosed base they had landed on somewhere, in a place not on any map, no flags, no markings, no questions. The seals moved quickly, disappearing into the canvas shadows like they had never existed, leaving her standing in silence, only Bishop lingering long enough to say one sentence that she would keep like a blade under her ribs. "They will come looking now." Then he was gone, swallowed by a door that clicked shut without sound. She was given a bunk, no number, no key, just a cot in a room lit by red emergency bulbs and walls lined with old equipment and crates marked with nothing. She did not sleep. She cleaned her rifle and stared at the concrete ceiling, replaying the mission. Not because she doubted what she had done, but because something still felt unfinished. The man in the control room had known her name, had known things only her own command should have known, and someone had fed it to him. The compound may have burned, but the network had not. Someone was still out there, and they were watching. The next morning, or maybe the next night, no clocks in this place. Bishop returned with a file, thin and without labels. He tossed it onto the table beside her cot and said, "This was pulled from what remained of their secondary server." Kira opened it and found a list. Not names. Not places, just call signs. Raptor Ghost Echo 9. And one that stopped her cold whisper hers. She looked up and met Bishop's eyes. "So they were tracking us." "No," he said, worse. "They were selecting you." She flipped to the last page and found photos. Grainy surveillance shots, taken in locations she had never been to, but clearly showed her leaving buildings, riding in convoys, even inside a mess hall that had been supposedly secure. She handed the file back. "How do we draw them out?" Bishop nodded slowly and said, "We let them think you survived alone. We let them think you are hunting them, and we wait for them to panic." The next 3 weeks were silent, but not calm. Attacks began appearing on the grid again. Small strategic hits against private firms, defense contractors, black sites in countries no one admitted operating in. Whoever had escaped that compound was not hiding. They were retaliating, and every time someone was hit, a mark was left, a bullet to the left eye, same signature as Kira's confirmed kills from her previous missions. They were framing her, weaponizing her legacy against her. Reeves called her once through an encrypted channel, his voice cracking slightly like someone had broken the shell around his pride. "I know it wasn't you, but you're in the wind now, HQs. Nervous. Too many bodies piling up. You need to come in." Kira didn't answer right away. She stared at the screen and thought about the night they left her, the words they used, the silence that followed. "You made your call," she said flatly. "Now I'll make mine." She ended the call. That night, Bishop came to her with a different plan. "We found one of the handlers," he said, "a courier used by the group operating out of Jakarta." Kira stood and grabbed her gear. "When do we leave?" They didn't. Instead, they moved. By proxy, coordinating with 2 deep cover assets stationed inside Jakarta, who tracked the courier for 72 hours until they watched him drop a package at an embassy back door. The package was intercepted, and inside it was a data shard encrypted untouchable until. Kira looked at the encryption and something clicked. She had seen this cipher before, during training. During the Black Months when she had been in testing for Project Hollow program, so classified it had no official paper trail A program that selected elite operatives and pushed them past human thresholds to create persistent silent assets, ghosts. But she had failed the final evaluation, or so she was told. She worked for years thinking she had been rejected for instability or disobedience or some mark on her file that said not suitable for Black Tier. Now she realized the truth. They had not rejected her. They had deployed her and then watched. She stared at the data shard and said, "I think this was meant for me." Bishop nodded as if confirming a suspicion. He had held for too long. "Then you know what comes next." She looked up, eyes dark. "Yeah, I do. We give them a reason to come out of the dark." Over the next 5 days, strange things began happening across 3 continents. Surveillance drones went offline over. A secure airfield in Nevada, a private jet, exploded on the runway in Tunisia. Just moments before takeoff, an entire communications array in northern Finland went dark for 4 hours. And in each case, the target was someone connected to Project Hollow Former. Psychologists, trainers, mission handlers, evaluators, all gone. All vanished, and each site had one thing in common: playing card left behind, the Queen of Spades, Kira's old mission token. The media had no idea, but the agencies did. They were panicking. She waited just long enough for the panic to crest before sending her message through the same dead channel used by the courier in Jakarta. 6 words. "You left me. I remember everything," and within 12 hours, they responded, "A time, a place, an offer of truce." Lai Bishop tried to talk her out of going alone. "This smells like a trap," he said. "It is," she answered, "but they need to believe they've got the upper hand." She wore no armor, only a sidearm, and carried the data shard in a pouch around her neck. The rendezvous was set on neutral ground, a church abandoned in the hills above Sarajevo. She entered just before dawn, light leaking through the broken windows like thin knives. They were already there. 2 men, 1 woman. Faces she did not recognize, but movements that screamed military. They stood at the altar. One of them smiled. "We thought you might come home eventually." She walked slowly down the aisle, her hand never far from her sidearm. "You built me," she said. "You broke me. And now you want to bring me back in." "We want to offer you clarity," the woman said. "You were never rejected. You were activated." Kira stopped 3 paces from them. "I figured that part out." The other man stepped forward. "Then you know what you are." She looked him dead in the eye and said, "I am the end of you," and from the rafters above the ceiling, shattered. Seals dropped in from ropes, weapons aimed precision tight, no warning shots. The 3 handlers reached for their weapons, too late. The room exploded in chaos. Kira moved fast, dropping low as bullets whined through the dust. Bishop's voice roared in her ear. "We got them. Move now." Move. She sprinted through the fire, through the hail of stone and light and smoke, and as she reached the exit, someone tackled her to the ground. She rolled, pulled her knife, and saw the face, the same handler from the Jakarta photos, the one with the scar across his temple. He whispered in her ear as they struggled, "You think this ends here? You think we are the only ones?" Then he grinned and said, "You are still one of us." And before she could answer, he bit down on something in his jaw and went limp. Kira staggered back, breath-ragged blood on her hands. She looked at Bishop, who was already pulling files from the handler's pack. Inside were names, places, and a new symbol she had never seen before. A circle with 3 slashes through it. Bishop looked up and said, "We're not done," and in her gut she already knew. This was just the beginning. The wind howled across the tarmac as the rotors chopped the sky into pieces, the night air. vibrating with the kind of electricity that usually came before lightning or fire or something that could never be undone, and Kira stood at the edge of the landing zone, her boots planted as if she were daring the storm to move her. The SEALs moved in behind her silent shadows, each of them weighed down with new intel, new scars, and a quiet understanding that whatever they had uncovered inside that church above Sarajevo was only the edge of something that had no bottom. The files taken from the handler who died with a capsule in his mouth were fragmented, filled with dead coordinates and blacked-out names, but one symbol repeated again and again, a circle with 3 slashes through it drawn by hand burned into papers, carved into crates. Not an organization, not a country, not a command structure, something else. Something older. Bishop had gone silent after reading the last page, his eyes hard, his mouth tight, and for once, he had no orders, no explanations, no plan. Kira had asked him what it meant, what the symbol stood for, and all he had said was, "We were never the only ones." Now the extraction was real, the helicopter real, the mission debrief waiting back at a base that may or may not exist on any map, but none of it felt finished. None of it felt clean as the SEALs loaded in. Kira turned her head and saw them. Her old unit Reeves and the others standing across the runway, watching her as if they were seeing a ghost, or maybe trying to decide whether she was something worse. They were clean uniforms, straight backs, polished gear, and nervous eyes. She walked toward them slowly, the wind whipping her jacket open and the rain returning like a second skin. Reeves took a step forward, then stopped when she didn't. Slow her pace. She stopped inches from him, her eyes unreadable, her voice low. "You left me?" Reeves opened his mouth, then closed it. "Had tried again. We didn't know. You gave the order," she said. "You said leave her." He flinched. There were calls above me. There were protocols. There was chaos. Kira stared at him, then reached into her vest and pulled out a data stick. "This is what your protocols bought." She shoved it into his chest inside. "You'll find files on Project Hollow and a dozen other Black Tier programs. No one ever told you about programs that started long before we got here and will keep running long after we're gone." She turned to the others. "You followed orders. You left someone behind. I won't." Then she walked away. Reeves called after her. "So what are you now?" Her answer came without looking back. "Not yours." The bird lifted off minutes later, wind hammering against the side of the aircraft as Kira sat with her eyes on the ground below. Bishop sat across from her, silent as always, holding a folder, with a single location circled in red. The Arctic Circle A station decommissioned 5 years ago. Officially, unofficially, it was listed in the recovered documents as Site 0. Kira stared at it, then met his eyes. "What is it?" He didn't blink. "The place where they made the first one." The words sank into her like frost. She didn't ask the first. What she already knew. The files hinted at trials, never logged footage, erased subjects, created and erased again, assets who never made it to the field but were. Never declared dead, just missing. It was no longer about survival. This was a hunt. They landed at a cold weather facility designed to look abandoned, but humming with quiet life inside. Bishop led her down corridors lined with steel and frost to a room, where 2 women and a man waited, none in uniform, all watching her like a weapon freshly unboxed. The woman with gray in her hair stepped forward. "You are Whisper." Kira said nothing. "We created a shadow that went off script." The woman continued. "Now we need it back on task." Kira looked around. "I'm not your weapon," the man smiled. "Cold, no, you're their nightmare." Kira turned to Bishop. "Why am I here? Because you were never just a sniper." He said, "You were the prototype that worked." She remembered the cold room years ago, the tests, the injections, the simulations she thought were training. They weren't preparing her for war. They were turning her into the war itself. She left that room with no answers, only new coordinates and a time 0300 site. 0 drop zone would be blind, no comms, no evac go. In fine, the origin end. The jump came fast. The wind like knives. The landscape white and endless. She landed hard, snow breaking her fall, but not her stride. No one followed. This was a solo insertion. She moved through the ice fields for 6 hours before she saw the tower, black dead silent Site 0. The door was open. Not broken, not forced. Just open. She stepped inside. The lights flickered weak and yellow over a floor covered in dust that looked too perfect, like no one had walked it in years, but the air was warm. Something was running. She moved room to room, each one filled with old terminals, old chairs, old restraints. Then a voice crackled through an overhead speaker. You came home after all. It was her voice. She froze. The sound played again. You left me. You left me. The words from the runway fed back through a machine. Someone had recorded her, and now they were playing her. She moved faster toward the core-down steel staircases into the dark, where no lights followed the final door opened without resistance. Inside was a room filled with screens, all of them showing versions of her, different missions, different years, different failures. They had watched her from the beginning. This wasn't surveillance. It was observation, and at the center of the room was a chair, occupied. She approached slowly, rifle raised. The figure in the chair lifted its head, her face, her voice, but not her. The copy smiled. You lasted longer than they expected. Kira circled her. What are you? The prototype, the woman said, the one they shelved when you surpassed the metrics. She stood now, same height, same face, same everything. They called me Wraith, and now they want me gone. Kira aimed her rifle. Then why are you still breathing? Because I have the rest of the list, the YA. Ones they still control. The ones who don't even know they're part of the program. She held up a drive. You kill me. You kill the only shot you have at finding them. Kira hesitated for the first time since the rain on that ridge, since the silence on the radio, since the crawl through enemy lines. She hesitated. The drive was real. She knew it was. So was the danger. The woman wasn't lying, but she was something else too. An echo, a reflection, a weapon pointed at the world. Then Wraith said something that froze Kira to the bone. They activated one last month. Someone close to you. Someone who thinks they're still clean. She tossed the drive to the ground between them. Choose. And then the power cut out. Darkness swallowed the room. Footsteps scattered. Movement. Everywhere. Kira dropped and rolled gun up, but when the emergency lights flickered back on, the chair was empty. The drive was gone, and painted on the wall in something too dark to be, ink was the same symbol, the circle with 3 slashes. Kira backed. Out of the room, her breathing tight, her heart a drum beat. Outside, the storm had picked up again. She called into the comm, no answer, no extraction, no confirmation. She was alone again, but this time she wasn't abandoned. This time they were running from her. She started moving east toward a flare in the sky, a signal maybe, or another trap. Didn't matter. She had a list to find. She had ghosts to hunt. And somewhere in the system, someone she knew, someone she trusted, was already activated. The cold cut through her jacket, through her bones, but it didn't matter. She had survived worse, and she was not Whisper anymore. She was the reckoning they never saw coming, and she was just getting started.